Episode 8 opens on a dark train station within the walls of Argus, the crossing signal sounding as the Argus Limited pulls in. It is snowing, and the platform is lit by a few overhead lights and the distant warm glow of other buildings. Otherwise, it's dark. Throngs of people rush off the train, borderline kissing the ground they're walking on after the harrowing ride. John, Nora, Ren, and Cardin are helping escort people off alongside the conductors, though all four of them look visibly exhausted. Especially Cardin, whose arm is in a makeshift sling. With all the people deboarded, Cardin speaks to an Argus security official, who runs off while Cardin returns to John, Nora, and Ren. He explains, "I requested a rescue team and a medic to go search for the other half of the train, but we really don't have the people to spare." John asks, "Isn't there an Atlesian base here? Couldn't they help?" Cardin looks off to the side and replies, "From what I've heard, they've been withdrawing for a while now. As long as I've been here, they haven't done much." As they're rounding out that conversation, the remaining two members of Cardinal walk up to switch shifts. They pause, looking at the injured Cardin without Russell, their faces paling. Cardin quickly gets them caught up on what happened in the simplest terms possible and explains he's already put in a request for leave to go locate Russell. If they're lucky, his scroll is still transmitting and they can find him within a couple of days of searching. Nora balks at that and asks, "Just Russell? What about Team RWBY?" To her surprise, John shakes his head. "RWBY cut the train to save us. She'd be pissed if we went back into the fray like that. I have faith in Team RWBY. They'll make it here, I'm sure." Ren stoically watches the explanation but catches sight of John's fist trembling as he speaks. John looks to Cardin and nods. "Go save your partner." Cardin gives him an appreciative smile and says, "If we see Team RWBY, we'll give them a hand." The two teams split ways on amicable terms, and Junior makes their way to the main terminal of the station. There they meet John's older sister, Saffron Kata Arc. She greets them warmly, though comments, "I thought there was going to be more of you." It takes her a moment to read the room that something happened on the train. John is honest and says, "Grim attacked and our group got split. But I'm sure they'll be along eventually." Saffron jokes lightly that, "If they can keep you safe getting here, I'm sure they'll make it just fine." John gives a slightly pained smile and nods. Saffron continues, saying, "Well, I hope you don't mind if I stop for groceries on the way home. I need to pick up some nuggets for Adrian. He's been on a big chicken kick." There's a silence from the three when Ren speaks up for all of them. "Not a problem. I think we could all use some normalcy." We cut to a Mistralian house near a stream where we see an empty clothesline, smears of blood, and smudges of something much, much darker. We cut over to the street beyond, where Cinder, now wrapped in the hooded outfit we saw her wear in Canon Volume 6, is barely walking through the back alleys of Mistral, clutching her grim arm, which is dripping black ooze. She nears the mouth of an alley, when a patrol of Menagerie militiamen walk by, on a patrol to set up wanted posters around the city. Cinder herself is included among the posters, and she shrinks into the alley, pulling her hood down over her head a little tighter. She vanishes into the shadows as one of the militiamen look her way before moving on. We have a small montage of Cinder trying to cross the city, and constantly coming across different forces who are all looking for her, such as the previously mentioned militia, but also the local Mistralian police and huntsmen. This includes Team Auburn, who come the closest to discovering her while she's ducked under a bridge. When they go to check, however, Cinder has smuggled herself onto a fishing rowboat that was docked below, and cut it loose to flow downstream. As she hides below the lip of the boat, she looks to the sky and we transition to one dyed a deep sangria color. A young Cinder sits up in a skiff, wincing from a bruise on her head. At the controls, unaware of her consciousness, is Tyrion, steering them down what appears to be a river. Quiet as she can, Cinder escapes from her binds and tries to jump into the water, only to pause upon seeing it. The water is a deep, gooey black, a veritable sea of grim ooze that we've come to know over the last few volumes. Tyrion, without looking at Cinder, explains, "Oh, that's not water. Wouldn't want to fall in now, would we?" Cinder falls back onto the bench and asks, terrified, "Where are you taking me?" Tyrion bends his neck backwards to look at her, smiling from ear to ear. "To meet our goddess." Cinder begins to respond, "I don't believe in a..." and Tyrion cuts her off. "You will." "You will." They continue sailing forward as Evernight Castle peeks over the horizon. Evernight fades away only to be replaced by a well-worn Mistrali building that has been host to a number of businesses over the years. Cinder, standing in an alley, approaches it as casually and stealthily as she can. She slips inside, revealing it to be a renovated hostess club with a familiar Spoder motif. Cinder walks through the club, taking note of the security guards dotting the floor, and noticing they're all very subtly taking notice of her as well, despite carrying on a festive and relaxed atmosphere. After a moment of searching, she locates a table in the back that she walks up to brazenly. She throws a pouch of lien on the table, just as 2 bouncers step up to protect the woman sitting at it. Seeing the money, she waves the 2 back, and for the first time we get a good look at Little Miss Malachite, no longer behind a screen and lazily smoking her cigarette on a holder. Little Miss raises a brow and looks at Cinder skeptically. "Quite brazen of you to come in here after that stunt your bully boy pulled." Cinder sits at the chair across from Little Miss and stares her down. "I had nothing to do with that decision. He oversold what he could do and snapped under the pressure." Little Miss fans herself. "Ah, but you were associates, weren't you?" Cinder leans back and crosses her arms with a slight wince. "He was a useful idiot." She looks to the bouncers around Little Miss. "Something I'm sure you can relate to." The biggest bouncer narrows his eyes and leans down to Little Miss, asking, "Ma'am, is she insulting us?" Little Miss confirms, "Why yes, she is." He glares at Cinder. "You want me to kill her, ma'am?" Little Miss pats his arm. No, don't worry about it. Mama's got this." Little Miss turns her own glare to Cinder. "Better relations, better results. Treat your subordinates like friends, and they'll treat you just the same." Cinder snaps. "I don't have time for this." Little Miss takes a long drag of her cigarette and puffs the smoke out in Cinder's direction. "No, you don't have time. Half the underworld, all of the overworld. Surprised at this point anyone could stand you. Suppose that's why you came to me." Cinder shoots back, "You have low standards." Little Miss coolly responds, "Plenty good in the bargain bin. You'd be surprised what you can find." Little Miss taps out her cigarette and says, "Let's cut to it, shall we? You're desperate, and just put your life savings on the table." Cinder shrugs. "Someone's." Little Miss offers a bitter smile. "Cute. What do you want to know exactly?" Cinder responds, "I'm looking for a huntress in training and her tagalongs. Name's Ruby Rose. They were involved in the noise up at Haven. I need to know where they are, where they're going, and a way to get there." Little Miss scratches her chin and thumbs through the lien on the table. "Ah, a travel package. Not my usual forte, but I like a challenge." She smiles wickedly at Cinder. "And you bring plenty of that. I'll try to have you some results within the week." Cinder stands, slamming the table. "A week is too long." Little Miss pushes back. "A week is what it'll take. Believe me, the sooner I'm done with you, the better for me. It'll be done in a week." She turns to her bodyguard. "Wilbur, will you be a gentleman and show our guests the door?" Cinder pushes her chair away, clearly livid, but she composes herself. "Don't bother. After Adam, I'm not dealing with any more insects." Cinder stomps towards the exit, while Wilbur leans down and asks Little Miss, "She knows that spiders are arachnids, right?" To which Little Miss just pats his arm and says, "Yes, honey, she knows." As Cinder walks out the door, the contrasting light from outside blinds the camera. A special thanks goes out to all of my wonderful patrons for supporting the channel. If you like this content and want more of it, please consider supporting it. Also consider picking up my new action-adventure novel, The Artificer, which is now available for purchase on Amazon in digital and in print. With that all said, back to your regularly scheduled fixing. When the light dims, we're outside a grocery store in Argus, with John, Nora, Ren, and Saffron. Saffron heads towards the door and says, "I'll just be a minute. There's a nice coffee shop around the corner where the rest of you can wait. Though, the prices are kinda getting up there. They have everywhere." The trio thank her for the recommendation and begin walking down the street. Nora comments that John's sister is nice, and John remarks, "You didn't have to grow up with her. She's nice now, but she was a demon to me until she moved out. I still remember her and my other sisters treating me like their personal dress-up doll." He shivers at the memory. Nora retorts, "I have no clue why. You really don't cut a good figure in a dress. Have you seen your shoulders?" John defensively grabs his shoulders and asks, "What's wrong with my shoulders?" Ren cuts in, "Nora," and she replies, "I've never been wrong a day in my life." John and Ren smile at that comment, but a moment later John catches sight of a park, and a wall pocked with red flowers. Curious, he says, "You two go on ahead to the coffee shop. I'm gonna check out the park." Nora asks if he wants anything to drink, and he just offhandedly asks for a latte. He begins crossing the street as she says they'll meet him there later. John explores the park and walks along the wall, discovering it littered with names. Reading name after name after name, some occasionally marked with bright red poppies, He's eventually drawn to a point with the densest number of flowers, of all varieties, accompanied as well by a bouquet at the base of the wall under the spot. He stops and looks at the name. The camera zooms in on the glossy black surface, reflecting John's shocked expression as the letters come into focus reading, Pira Nikos. John's eyes widen and he looks up and down the wall, realizing all at once what this wall may very well represent. His eyes come back to Pira's name, and he reaches out for it, his fingers ghosting over it for a second. From the side, a very familiar voice pops in. "I'm glad you finally made it." John whips his head around to see the speaker, and comes face to face with a dead ringer for Pira, though definitely older. She walks up beside him and rests a fresh bouquet at the wall, keeping her eyes locked on Pira's name. John says, "You're..." and she finishes, "Helen Nikos, it's nice to meet you." "John?" He blinks and says, "John Arc, and likewise." John's eyes wander back to the memorial wall and Helen explains, "This wall was built to remember all the people from Argus that died at Beacon. My husband and I try to come here every week." White irises were her favorites. John stares at her sadly and says, "I never knew." They stand in silence for a short while before Ren and Nora call out to John and walk up to him with their drinks. Nora asks, "What are you doing?" And the words die in her throat the moment she sees Helen. She manages to recover and drawls out, "Sorry, who are..." John motions between the three. "Nora, Ren, this is Helen Nikos, Pira's mother." Helen gives a tiny wave and says, "Hello there." Nora is noticeably like a deer in headlights, while Ren bows his head to Helen and makes Nora bow her head, gently as well. He adds to the motion, saying, "It's an honor to meet you. Pira was a dear friend to us. All of us." His eyes briefly swing a glance to Nora. Helen smiles, and they overhear Saffron in the distance calling for John and his friends. Helen picks up on this and passes off her contact info. "You three should come over sometime to chat. My husband would be thrilled to meet you." John thanks her and she says, "Not a problem. Don't be strangers," before walking back the way she originally came. John looks at the contact info on his scroll, then to the wall. His fingers come up to rest on the bronzed edge of his armor and he frowns. Saffron jogs up to the memorial, carrying 2 stuffed grocery bags while scanning the park for them. She catches the 3 at the memorial and visibly sags, slowing as she walks her way up to them. "I wanted you guys to get settled before I showed you this," she explains, looking at it with somber eyes. "I can't imagine what it's like seeing this when you're exhausted." John touches Pira's name one last time, replying, "It's fine. It wouldn't have mattered. Let's go." We follow a maple leaf as it falls beside the bouquet. Cut to black, end of episode.